I'm so excited to share this video of Jason talking about his experiences moving in his life from intense anxiety, debilitating, housebound with panic attacks, and then a few years later to being free of anxiety. And he really breaks down the somatic process and shares quite a bit about his life and how it happened. And so I'm excited to share it with you. There is a slight glitch in that when we were chatting, for some reason, the video did not record me. It only recorded him. So you hear me, but you don't see me. So I could re-record it, but this was really like a casual chat with him. And it's just authentic and natural. And so I thought, all right, you'll see me just with the still photo and you'll hear me and then you'll hear him and he's doing most of the talking. So I really encourage you to listen to this interview in its entirety. You know, if you're suffering from anxiety or really any chronic condition, understanding the somatic process will, could really change your experience in terms of how you approach your healing. So welcome. And if you have questions, just comment and I'll be sure to answer. Hey, Jason.
Hello, Alyssa. How are you this evening or this morning?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Good. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Absolutely. I'm glad to be here.
I want to talk about your journey in somatic healing and share, because people really don't know very much about somatic healing and how it actually works. So my idea is to invite people who've had pretty amazing experiences with somatic healing. And so I thought maybe you'd share something about, why you were attracted to it in the first place. Like what was wrong that had you seeking somatic healing?
Well, yeah, I struggled with anxiety my whole life, and I've had bouts of it where it's been like, as you know, completely debilitating. And this last bout I had, kind of over COVID. I didn't leave the house really for probably 6 months. Even going to my car, getting in the shower. I mean, I was having panic attacks. It was extreme. Nobody can fathom how bad it was unless you've experienced it. Most people, when they even hear anxiety, they think, oh, you're a little nervous. Like, no, this is like next level stuff we're talking here. And so, yeah, I tried everything. I read every book about anxiety, the DARE program, to just everything, every YouTube video, all of it. And most of it just came down to, you just gotta keep facing those fears and pushing the envelope further and further out, and expanding your boundaries, if you will, and eventually you'll feel better, even though you're literally terrified, your body's, all of the alarm bells are going off and you feel like you can't breathe in the shower, whatever the sensations are. And I was just, not working out. So I had heard about somatic healing, I don't know, someplace on the internet somewhere. And it just made more sense to me that and working with the inner child, that would be the way in which, I could find freedom from the anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I kind of bounced around my own story, but
no, that's all good. That's all good. It's probably also worth saying, before we go into it, that because people would be wondering that, you also sought medical care and, have a psychiatrist helping you and have some pharma support, but still, even with all that support, it was still impacting your life such that, you weren't really weren't living well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was taking Xanax as least often as I could, all sorts of things, and it wasn't enough. It wasn't until I really, connected with my inner child and kind of did a little bit of all these different things. But the most profound thing was definitely the inner child work, which, like, and we've spoken about before, it sounds crazy to people, like that you have some inner child from the past that's been traumatized by their parents, usually maybe in the beginning, or some other incident. And so that kind of sets you into a place where you just don't feel safe, and then you, what's the word? You adapt to those traumas as a kid, and then eventually kind of pile up inside you and they can pop out all at once, like in my case, I think, and just kind of went crazy with the anxiety and stuff like that. But now, like even just recently, I was at Disneyland this last week, and my friend went on a ride without me, and I had a little bit of, I'm by myself. You know what I mean? Nobody's here. Well, he's on the ride. What if? And some of that stuff came back up again, and then I decided to go home, not because of that, just because the bride broke and it was just a mess. So I went home. But walking through Main Street and the parking lot, I was feeling some of those things come up again. And I didn't connect with my inner child right away. I was kind of starting to do the old pattern, just like, oh, well, come on, no big deal, kind of talking myself out of it. And then as soon as I went there and recognized it, and it was like, I just felt this release of that anxious energy. And then I was fine.
So what did you
It was
actually
like,
do? We said as soon as I went there, what is it that you actually did?
what exactly did? I just saw that my inner child, this like scared little boy that I've connected with before through meditation. That's where I kind of first saw him. He's either anxious or sad. It's kind of like the way I usually typically see him. And then I have to go back in time a bit, but I would just continuously connect with him in the places where I was anxious, where clearly he was anxious, right? It's kind of coming up from there to here. When driving, the shower that I mentioned earlier, things like that, when my anxiety was high. And so the more I connected with him, and it took a while. It wasn't like just like, oh, look, hey, inner child, we're fine. We're in the car driving to our friend's house. Don't worry about it, kind of thing. No, 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 no. It took months of reassurance and connecting in that way, and just recognizing just a little bit of talking to him to get to a point where now it rarely happens. Do I have any kind of anxiety pop up? And when it does, sometimes I even forget to talk to him because he seems like he's been good for a long time. But this time something activated him. In particular, a moment actually from Disney where I had a panic attack, like in 2018. I left some friends behind. I was going to the car by myself and I started having a panic attack, called my mom. I was freaking out, hyperventilating, the whole thing. And so I was thinking about that as I was in Disney that day. But it didn't get there because I recognized what was really going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let's break it down because, I think just the idea, I connected with my inner child is, it's outside the realm of what most people would understand what that means. So I'll just give a tiny bit of theory and then maybe you can tell us more about, your experience of getting there.
Sure.
So the theory is that when we have traumatic experiences as a child, part of us becomes frozen, at that age, in that experience. And when we're not met with presence, when we're not seen and we're not comforted and reassured, and, when that part doesn't feel safe, when the emotions are so big, that part literally freezes. And, so we grow around this frozen child. And for people who've had multiple or chronic traumatic things in childhood, there can be many aspects, that are frozen. And I use the word frozen loosely, but I think it's the best way to describe it. So when people attempt to look within to find what's really going on, in my experience of teaching people this, it takes about 4 to 6 weeks of regular meditation, for people to learn to still their minds enough to be able to feel, this deep. I think, Jason, if I recall, is like about 5 weeks where you're in your meditation and you start to have an image of this little boy that you came to recognize. That boy, some people don't recognize it right away. That boy was you. And then from the first time people begin to access this imagery, then there's the whole process of learning how to connect with this child. And for the most part, these frozen inner children are not that receptive, because they've been left alone in a scared state for 20, 30, 40 years. So they don't come running, with open arms. It takes some time to build a relationship and to build trust. And so that's the process you were saying, the 3 or 4 month process where you kept finding this boy and just sort of being with him. And he could see you, but he was not interested in listening to you, talking to you. Like there was no receptivity until, do you remember the process of how you built trust with him? It was wild.
Yeah, I just think just always connecting in those places where I knew he was anxious.
Right.
It was pretty much the car was the place most of the time as it went along. So every time before I got in the car, maybe I was in the shower, I would start talking to him a little bit, and in the car, just kind of, yeah.
I remember one thing in particular was to create trust. You were telling him, I know that I see that you're really worried. I see that you're anxious, and I'm here with you. And
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like resonant language.
yeah, and I'm going to come back and check on you. Yeah.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
idea
Yeah.
of creating those promises that you then followed up with, so that that child, has an adult that he can rely on. He can rely on this adult to notice how he's feeling and to show up consistently with presence and the willingness to be there with him through his discomfort, which is what you didn't have, as a child.
Right. Yeah.
And so that part of you was able to relax. And then this is the most magical part, to kind of to watch it unfold, is that as that child learns to be at ease, which is very much learned, through your adult self now being strong enough to hold him, then these symptoms, which most people believe are chemical brain related, and we watch those symptoms dissipate in real time, right in the moment that that child relaxes. The anxiety symptoms, which might be good to describe in more detail, about your breath, even that little worry that you have, in terms of your breath catching or your nose sniffling, or like small things, but that they're the beginning of what could be anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah. There were so many sensations that I would get when I was anxious, and especially when it was really, really bad. Um, yeah. And then slowly over time, as there was trust between my inner child and I, they went away, you know?
Right. And do you
It
remember
sounds
that?
crazy.
It
Yeah.
does sound crazy, but I remember you telling me stories of them going away right in the moment, like as soon as you were able to contact
Yeah.
someone.
I just described to Disneyland this past Thursday.
Right.
Yeah. It was like, yeah, and I mean, it's still. I mean, your body does start to amp up, right? You connect with the inner child. It's the inner child that kind of lets go, just
Right.
relax. And there's still some maybe a little leftover bit of stuff, but then just kind of you just got to give it a little time to go away. But it's nothing that's preventing me from, you know, doing what I wanted to do, because I would never go to Disneyland just even a few years ago, maybe.
Right.
Lots of my life with my world is getting like very small.
Very, very
I literally had to have people. This. I had to have somebody here all the time. If somebody left, if somebody's gone for an hour, it was like the worst. It was. I mean, this anxiety was extreme to the extreme.
right. You couldn't be alone whatsoever. I remember.
No, it was terrifying. It was so the panic attacks I had were so terrifying. So to be in the place, because when we first, so whoever's watching, when I first started working with Alyssa, I was still I had had some panic attacks in 2018, and I was still having a lot of residual, physical sensations. And that's where I came to the somatic thing. Is like, why do I always keep feeling this sensation all the time, and it comes and it goes, and it just drives me crazy. And it felt like it was really limiting me from doing the things I want to do in my life. And then we started working together, went to the LTI group. And it got worse due to COVID and other situations in my life at the time. And then I finally got it all, worked out and connected. And, now I'm freer than I've ever been,
Mhm. Well, you really
Like,
put
I
in.
never thought I'd escape all of this. I thought it would just be like forever.
Right.
It took me 43 years, but, I got there.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
And so when you think back, like kind of compare your experience of, I mean, I know you mentioned a little bit about having, reading the books and the desensitization approach, and kind of like sensations are normal, they're not dangerous. So sort of
Yeah.
compare that path to what you've learned through the somatic therapy. Like, what are your thoughts about it now?
Um,
Like, and everybody's different, but just in terms of your personal perspective, like, why has this worked so much better?
well, yeah, because you're getting to the root of what's actually going on.
Right.
Because just recognizing my symptom, just basically this screaming child, right? It's like, come on, pay attention.
Yeah.
And if I just keep ignoring him, yeah, of course, maybe eventually people do get better on these DARE programs, and they do,
Yeah.
But gosh, I mean, that's not the way to do it. You're just creating more trauma, and eventually it's probably gonna come back and get you later. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. But this is like you're dealing with the source of the anxiety,
Mhm.
not just kind of push it away, with,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, that's
And
it.
who would do that to their kid, right? You're gonna lock your streaming kid in a room, or just put them on the roller coaster, make them ride it over and over and over and over and over again until they feel better about it. That's not good. You know.
Yeah.
So I see people, parents at Disneyland doing it all the time. Oh, it's okay. It's not scary, and the kids come off screaming their heads off. I'm like, you horrible parents. They're gonna be starving on that one.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So the idea being that the anxiety is a symptom of some aspect of us that
Right.
isn't feeling at ease. And so we have to find who isn't feeling at ease, who within us is
Exactly.
not feeling at ease. And when we can give that part the care that he or she needs, then the symptoms the body can actually come back to balance once the primary source of the fear is attended to.
Yeah, and not just that. I mean, there's so many different self-care things that come into play,
Of course.
removing
Yes.
people from your life that are awful. Who knows?
Yeah.
And that's what I work on too now. And people are around me or come around that I'm like, oh, I try to make better choices,
Mhm.
because I know that where I'm at now is where I want to stay. And so I don't want to go back to dealing with this sort of stuff. So it's not worth it
Mhm. Yeah.
to
So you're just
disturb.
holding boundaries and making choices that that make you happier, but also that keep that child at ease in a way
Yeah.
that you weren't aware of in the past.
Yeah. I want to be at ease. The other way is,
Of course. Well, who doesn't want to be at ease, right?
I know, right?
Yeah.
Definitely, definitely.
So
But
now, this is obvious to you. So I'm just wondering, like, do you have any advice for someone that is super anxious and is not quite sure, like the whole fear of like, what if this doesn't work for me? Or, any kind of someone who's just embarking on the idea of some kind of somatic journey, any kind of advice for getting started?
you have to have somebody that's a good coach, somebody that knows how to direct you through the pathway to not being an anxious person and being at ease. That's number one, really. That's the reason why I'm where I'm at now. If I didn't have these tools, um,
So having
and
someone that you trust to support you.
right, yeah, somebody you trust that will support you for sure, and get all the knowledge from as well. And what was I going to say? I don't know. I just sound like an infomercial because it's like, oh, I've tried everything before and it
No,
didn't work
no.
until now. You know what I mean? Because people
Yeah.
always say those things. But it's true. I mean, I literally have had the worst anxiety off and on for my whole life. And I have tried everything to varying degrees. And this is the only thing that worked for me, you know?
Mhm. I think one of the things that people are worried about, when we talk about who within is having this experience, people are worried
Mhm.
about being re-traumatized. That seems to be a really big
Oh,
fear of dealing with, the source of the problem. So
sure.
it's an interesting distinction, in your case. I don't know if you have anything to say about that. I think that what we're doing is not so much right into the heart of exactly what happened that was traumatic, but we're dealing
Mhm.
with the repercussions. We're dealing with you know, it's not that we can't deal with the source, but the beginning process is dealing with the adaptations that happened as a result of the trauma. So it
Right.
doesn't
Yeah. It's like, yeah,
re-traumatize, it helps support, the one who developed these fears after the
sure.
fact.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that was a concern of mine, and we have gotten close to the source, of I think where my anxiety came from in the past, and I would feel like a little, and then we just stopped, and came back at it later, or didn't for a while, or whatever.
Mhm,
But I don't know. Yeah, I always felt safe. I didn't feel like I was going to go over the edge
mhm,
if I got too close to the source, and maybe and some people in the somatic healing world say, you not even get to the source. Like you said, you could work,
mhm,
you can peel away the onion of this feeling of you're not safe, and not to really get to the core of it, even to like have relief and
mhm,
move on in a way, I guess. Maybe.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think that when and children need to be met, well, we all need to be met, with loving presence. And so when we can learn how to give that to ourselves, it does create a lot more space just for life in the present.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm. Well, thank you for being courageous enough to share this.
Yeah,
I
there was something else I was going to add. Well, I was even going to mention other things I could try, like talk therapy. I
Mhm.
know so many people that do just talk therapy. It's a total waste of money and time, in
No,
my
I
opinion.
don't know about that. I don't know
You
about
know
that.
about that? You like talk therapy?
No, I think it has a place. I think it really does.
Yeah, everything has a place, but I'm just saying my experience with counselors and dealing with anxiety, it's just all the same stuff in the books, and it just goes around circles and gets you nowhere. Like I feel like I've had the most change through this process with my anxiety, even other things, relating to people, dealing with situations, everything,
Mhm.
because it's a whole different way of looking at everything.
You want to
Just
say
kind
more
of
about
like,
that? How is it a whole different way of looking at everything?
well, I think, um, gosh, well, I think, dealing with my own inner child, I see other people's, not, I don't see their inner child, but I don't look at their behavior as like, oh, well, they're just assholes or something. I'm sure there's something else going on below the surface, and people always think, oh, I wonder why they're like this. But, when you
Mhm.
really think about children and what they go through, and I see my other friends with kids and how they parent them, and I think, oh, God, um,
Mhm.
you know, so I kind of give people more grace, I think, in dealing with situations. I'm like, well, gosh, I bet you they have something going on down there with their inner child that's not being addressed, and they may never ever connect with their inner child, sadly, because nobody's really, not nobody, but there isn't not a lot of information out there. It's
Mhm.
usually the traditional talk therapy that's promoted throughout you need to see a counselor. You know,
Mhm.
well, what does that counselor do? What's their yeah?
Well,
How
they
is that
help
going to work?
they help people become more aware, more aware of their patterns,
Oh
more
yeah,
aware of how they got there, more aware of,
yeah. It's not all
there's
bad.
a lot, they do a
Yeah.
lot of good things. Like
I know
let's
they're not
give them
all.
some
I know
credit.
I shouldn't poop. I'm just saying my experience has been that it wasn't. This is the most helpful and most success I've had. You
Yeah.
know.
But you also have to, all the talk-based therapy you had before made you
Hmm.
aware of how of what was going on. So, a lot of people start with talk-based therapy because they're completely oblivious to how they got where they are. So, even though it may not get you
Yeah.
all the way out of being anxious, it does bring you to a point of self-awareness, which is helpful. I have worked with people I worked with one woman, she had 50 years of every kind of talk-based therapy. And then I've worked with people who've had no therapy. So it's quite interesting, just to see the differences. And people can benefit from somatic therapy, whether they've had talk-based therapy or not. But I'd say most people have had some talk-based therapy. And I would say on balance that it makes them more receptive to this process because they've kind of gone through the exploration and they're pretty aware of how they got where they are, but then they're stuck and hasn't freed them. That's the problem.
Right, and that's even just like that. I mean, kind of off topic here, but that How to Do the Workbook by that Dr. Nicole, whatever it is.
Yeah.
She's
Yeah.
like, I was a talk therapist forever, and nobody was changing.
Yeah.
There wasn't really any change, and so now she's talking about things you're talking about. Some of the things,
Yeah.
not in as much detail, but yeah. I guess a little bit of me
You're
is pissed
you're
off that I
jaded.
wasted so much time with those things and, struggled for so long. And like, if more people were out there like yourself teaching this, more
Mhm.
counselors knew about this, other people would be helped faster and quicker and hopefully wouldn't have to go through as much as I went through. That's why I'm like, those talk therapists.
Yeah. It's your own. I mean, I think that the therapy world is still pretty medicalized. So,
Yeah.
we need to have a mix, between that medical knowledge and then actually healing through presence. And so this is where the mindfulness, the meditation, the bringing people when you take an anxious person and try and get them to be present, they actually can't be present. They're too anxious to be present. So, that's the journey of what is making them so anxious that they can't be present at all. And that's the challenge. That's the benefit of the therapy, but also the challenge, to try. And if you take an anxious person and they just talk and talk and talk, they'll stay completely in their minds. They're not at all dropping into what's in the body, and what the body holds, the block to being free from the anxiety. So we have to bring people into the body in a safe and gentle way so that they can relearn how to feel safe. And that is, I think, what the most powerful offering of somatic therapy is, to learn through your body how to feel safe. And it's not just, we're talking specifically about anxiety, but when the body is at ease and when people are at ease in their bodies, which is two things, all kinds of things can heal, because the body and the mind actually know how to heal. But when we're in a chronic state of contraction and stress, or fight and flight, it doesn't allow the body to heal. And so many illnesses benefit from this kind of approach, because we're removing the obstacle to relaxing and letting the parasympathetic nervous system do what it knows how to do. But it's been interrupted. Its function has been interrupted by chronic stress and trauma. So
Yeah.
I think there is a movement. I see it, in this direction.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, you're talking about parasympathetic and the inner child thing. You might want to talk about how that even connects, because it almost seems like if I was watching this, it'd be like, whoa,
Yeah.
they're different parts of it.
Yeah. I mean, when there's when there's some part of us or many parts of us that are frozen, what happens is this kind of chronic state of contraction. And in a chronic state of contraction, it raises cortisol levels. It prevents the parasympathetic nervous system from doing the restorative functions of the body. So when you meet people who have autoimmune disease, you're going to find some degree of chronic stress and trauma within that, because when the body cannot repair itself and it starts to attack itself, if you look deeper, I mean, there could be other cases, I don't know, but I've never met anyone that didn't have some kind of underlying trauma that contributed to those illnesses, and to actually pretty much every chronic illness, because that's the nature of chronic illness. The nature of it is that there's a wound, there's an unmet need, then there's an adaptation that happens in response to that unmet need. And over time, these adaptations take us further from the body's natural equilibrium, how the body naturally functions. And so people don't notice until, we can function like just a little bit tilted, and maybe just a little bit more and a little bit more. But at a certain point, like if I held myself like this, my back will start to hurt, or that's just a simple example. So the adaptations take the body and mind out of its inherent natural homeostatic rhythm.
And for some people, it expresses itself. You could have anxiety, you
Yes.
could have Crohn's disease, you could have both, right?
Yes.
So different people, yeah.
So then we have a mix of family history, and we have a mix of what was learned and how the body holds stress, and just the body makeup and the environment, and all the lifestyle factors that contribute to how that stress is held, and how that maladaptation is expressed. And so this is a journey backwards through those layers to try and free up the body's capacity to bring itself back to balance, which is exactly like in the most simplistic example, like your story at Disney, where right in the moment, what's required is presence in the moment to attend to the one whose experience is preventing the body from coming back to balance. I really appreciated the way you describe it. It's like the most intense part released right away, but then the rest, you said you have to wait for it to dissipate. And what's happening in that waiting for it to dissipate is the body is coming back to balance, because the source of that contraction has been attended to. And some of that will happen right away. and some of it will happen over time. And that's an acute example. If we're talking about a chronic situation, or a chronic symptom, particularly one that's really been lodged into the tissues in a more physical way, then like you're talking about, you just alluded to, which we hadn't talked about this whole interview, but also having Crohn's, that is a slower process to heal, because there's a lot of then anxiety, because there's a lot of tissue damage that accumulated over all of those years. And so things where there has been physical deterioration and change, that's going to be slower to heal, because we're intervening in that 20 years into the damage.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm asking you this live in the moment, but if someone were curious, or needed encouragement, would you be available to speak to anyone that wanted to learn more about somatic healing?
Oh yeah, of course. Absolutely. Yeah.
I know you've been kind of willing in the past, which is why I'm asking you, just in case anyone has questions, from a real person who's done it.
Yeah, who just found you on YouTube and was like, hey, this lady seems
Kind of funny, because I have like 20 YouTube followers, and somehow he found me through YouTube. I'm not really
yeah,
quite sure
that's
how
every
that
time you
happened.
say that. I just kept looking in somatics, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And then finally there was somebody with a physical, because a lot of people, they were talking about somatic stuff, wasn't like, I don't know, wasn't so physical. It didn't connect to what I was dealing with, back in 2018 or whatever. And your video like connected, and then we reached out, and then, And also the other thing I think people are aware of too, I mean, is that it takes a while. Don't expect it's incremental change over time.
It's fair to say that it is a slow process. Like, it's not a quick fix. Someone who wants a quick fix, somatic therapy is not a quick fix, but it's a very deep and profound, catalyst for change. So
Right.
yeah, it requires patience and commitment.
Yeah. Yeah, and even with meds, like, I take a very low dose, of Lexapro. It's not gonna get rid of panic attacks. It's not gonna get rid of these things. It's because I do all the other things. It keeps me, right and free. Because I was taking Lexapro before, even when I was having sensations before I met you. It didn't get rid of those sensations. It's not that ability to do that. Maybe it makes you more calm, but those physical manifestations of your inner child's trauma, they were just like, ah, and they got really loud, but, so it just doesn't work, It's maybe a tool if you're in the midst of a really bad period like I was, to kind of pull me a bit out of the mess. But to fix it, that's not going to be the key.
Mhm.
You got to do a lot more. Also, what I love about this too is that it's such a great. It's like I don't have to like reach for a Xanax or like call my mom or like all the things I was doing to manage my anxiety before, because I got to manage this, right? I got to manage my inner child. He's with me right now. So it's like that's what's great too. I don't feel like I'm ever going to be in a situation where I can't handle it, you know? And that's so much, that makes me feel safe already, just saying that. I don't have to worry about it. And when he starts throwing a tantrum, and if I feel somatic symptoms come up, I know what it is. I'm like, I'm having a heart attack. I'm like, no, my inner child is just, he's nervous about the situation that he's being put in, that reminds him of something that happened in the past where he didn't feel safe.
Right.
And now I'm here to take care of him.
Amazing.